Thank you. Like the number 4?
No, FR.
Oh, I did it right.
I don't know how to read it. I just
All together.
I just figured it would find it.
How did you find yours? What district?
Sarah Baker said crosswalk leader is District
Find my
41.
representative, I think it was.
Okay. Was she answering someone's question?
Oops.
No, I was wondering how to.
Crosswhite hater is District 41.
That's what it said.
Well,
Yeah, dispute.com at the end.
What is cross?
Are you on the Republican ballot, Clyde? Greg?
Democrat.
Democrat.
You are a Democrat?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Do you have anybody running against you
Okay,
on,
Denise,
on the
that's why
primary?
I-
No.
Okay.
No, he doesn't have a primary, but he's
Yeah.
November.
Nope.
Who's the incumbent?
Eric Roberts.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Roberts running. And they're all not
Sean Roberts. Dustin
Yeah.
Roberts.
Sean the
All
Patriot.
Patriots, Yeah.
So funny.
Okay, you're recording.
Okay, we're ready?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so we have candidate Greg Clyde here with us. He's running for a local district, House district in Oklahoma, District 83. He's been kind enough to bring a map. I really don't feel like, as a group leader, I've done a very good job of like telling you guys like where the districts are. And Greg's been really kind, so I'll get this picture up so that we
I
can
posted it.
Oh, wonderful. Amber already posted it. I'm just going to give him a few minutes to tell you about his campaign. And yeah, everyone welcome Greg Clyde to Plus 5.
You are on TikTok Live as
Great.
well.
Yeah, appreciate Allie and Derek
Yeah.
for putting it on. And awesome to be in front of all of you guys. A little bit about myself and how I ended up here. 10 years ago, I've got a sophomore, well, he's a junior now, and a freshman, 2 boys. When the junior was in kindergarten, he had 26 kids in his class, which seemed like a lot for one teacher to take care of. And so I called her, and she said it is, and encouraged me to call the principal, and the principal encouraged me to call the school board, and the school board member encouraged me to call my legislator. And my legislator didn't listen to me, but I started paying attention. Nothing changed at that point, but I started paying attention to what was going on down at the Capitol, particularly with education issues. Got involved with the Parent Legislative Action Committee group that made some real significant changes around the 3rd grade reading law in Oklahoma. It took it from a high stakes reading test to one where teachers can now take a portfolio to a committee of teachers, and they can determine where that kid can read throughout the year versus reading on one particular day. And so that was a significant win for that group. I'm a pharmacist by trade. I worked for CVS at the time. Toward the end of my time at CVS, I felt like my job was to shove as much money as I could in an envelope and send it to their headquarters in Rhode Island for them to have nice schools and roads and parks and all of the things that we want here in Oklahoma. So I opened my own store 3.5 years ago at Hefner and Rockwell, so that we could have a local option here in Oklahoma to shop and keep that money here. And over the last 3.5 years, I've donated $20,000 to our local school music program and other various organizations throughout the community. And so this is kind of that next step in serving my community. There's a really good opportunity in House District 83. Republicans in Oklahoma don't need one more seat. They've got a supermajority. Having one more seat doesn't make that supermajority anymore. But we do need people who are going to lower the rhetoric down at the Capitol and work across the aisle. And so people who come into my pharmacy know that I am all about serving people. And so for me, we need more leaders down at the Capitol who are willing to serve people. And so that's my promise to people. We saw bills filed just this last session that wrapped up, $10,000 to librarians if they had the wrong book on their bookshelf, $10,000 to teachers if they said the wrong thing in their classroom. And so those bills never go anywhere, but they create a lot of rhetoric. And we need people that are going to stand up to that rhetoric and lower the tone of our politics in Oklahoma and across the nation. And so that's why I'm running and need all of you to help me. So I'll open it up to any questions that you guys have.
I have your questions.
Okay.
And anybody online or here, you guys are free to jump in. So I'm curious about like a bipartisan either experience with a bill or something specific that you've been able to work with people who aren't not necessarily of your party.
Right.
What that was like and if you learned anything from it.
Yeah, so 4 years ago, I had a really good friend run for office. She's a Democrat, and I went out and helped her knock a lot of doors to help her win that election. She was a novice. She was a school teacher and didn't have a lot of money, and so needed all of the volunteer help she could get, and I helped her get through a very heated primary. And then after that primary, I had another friend that was in a very heated runoff. Again, centered around school. She was a Republican. And I went out and knocked in about 6 weeks, close to 1,000 doors for her. And so we need good people at the Capitol. If we get good people at the Capitol, good things will happen. And so good people tend to come to the middle and compromise. People who are a little more stubborn tend to be further apart. And so I knew both of these people, one was a Democrat, one was a Republican, they would work together down at the Capitol. And so I worked really hard to get both of them elected, and they're both serving down there now.
How do you feel that your experience or what you can bring to the table will make the Democratic caucus more effective?
So I think what's different from my experience than the Democrats we have in the House now, a lot of them come from either education or nonprofit background. I have a healthcare background that will be a little bit different. I think we have somebody else that's running that also has a healthcare background. So if we both win, that'll be huge.
We definitely need some healthcare background.
Yeah. So healthcare is kind of a void in the Democratic caucus right now.
Okay.
And so I think that voice will help.
Yeah. Okay, so the one thing that I hear when I talk to my Republican friends about voting for a Democrat is something that comes up. It's okay. Is it's like they're like, but you won't like the way a Democrat governs. They're not for something like local control. Can you speak to that at all about like how you feel like you would govern, like representing your constituents, and what you think about local control, if that's important to you or not?
Yeah, so it's really interesting in Oklahoma. We again have a supermajority in both sides at the Capitol, and Republicans are against local control at the Capitol when they're talking to Washington, but they're against local control. They're for local control when they're talking to people in D.C. Sorry.
Yeah.
When they're talking to people in D.C., they want to have
All the control.
all the control.
Right.
But then when they talk to somebody in Lawton,
Right.
they don't want them to have any control on schools or drilling or any of the other issues that should be a local decision. They don't have that. And so I think that's a little bit misplaced. I don't think that's a partisan issue. I think sometimes that gets labeled as Republican and Democrat, and I think again it just gets back to having the right people in seats that are representing us.
Yeah. So this group is meant to operate with a lot of different types of people, with a lot of different ideas and opinions. But what I said earlier when I opened up the Zoom, I was like, we want to elect people that can operate in a diverse middle ground, that we believe that government operates best that way, politics operate best that way. How do you think you might be able to work with Republicans on common sense gun safety? What do you think is reasonable?
So again, going back to my experience from 4 years ago, I've knocked thousands of doors 4 years ago, but more importantly, I've knocked close to 5,000 in the last 6 months, and several hundred in the last few weeks after all of these mass shootings that have gained national attention. Republicans want common sense gun safety. There's not a parent or grandparent that doesn't want to keep us safe. You know, for me as a healthcare worker, what happened in Tulsa is disturbing. I have to have a lot of very difficult conversations with people who want their narcotics at the pharmacy.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's a personal issue as well. It's the safety of me and my staff when we're having those difficult conversations around drug use and abuse. And so I think, as Jason said 30 minutes ago, you know, that the attention everybody's attention is drawn to this right now. And I think now is the time that we can get really common sense things done, raise the age limit, background checks and waiting period. You know, assault rifles are a little bit harder, but I still think there's room. I think there's enough momentum to get some of those
We
things
can at least talk
accomplished.
about it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why not talk about it and disagree and talk about it and disagree and talk about it?
Yep.
So, the other thing, as a pharmacist, I kind of want your take on. I know that one of the reasons, other than, you know, just to talk about gun safety and abortion, but abortion specifically, just from your standpoint about access to safe abortions for women who truly need them. Do you think that you'll be able to work with people across the aisle and be able to carve out any exceptions? And have you had any conversations about that?
And so abortion is a perfect example of, I was going to go back to our last conversation and bring it up, but we can use the abortion bill that was passed.
There were several, right?
5.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what happened at the legislature, what happens when there's a supermajority down there is they can suspend the rules and do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And so we saw that. And so if you want good legislation, we have to have a balance. And so the ability to suspend the rules allows them to push that envelope further and further and further. And with that supermajority, they can suspend the rules and do whatever they want. And that's what we saw with the most recent, I think it was Senate Bill 612. It was laid over from last year. It was dead because it was laid over, still alive,
Right.
but
'Cause it's
typically
Right.
those things don't come back the next year and go to a floor vote without anybody knowing that this is going to happen. But they suspended all the rules and they brought that to a vote and they pressed it where the Democrats weren't even allowed to debate it. And so the Democrats weren't even allowed to say, we're against this bill. It's a yes or no vote, up or down. You push the button now. And so, you know, I think that's a real problem that we have, particularly in Oklahoma, with that supermajority. And so we've got to chip away at that. I think it's 2/3 allows them to override. So you can still have a lot of Republicans, if we can keep them from suspending the rules, we get better legislation out of that because they have to have committee hearings, and out of committee hearings comes changes to some of the legislation. And you don't end up with laws that are written that they've got to go back next year and say, oh, we didn't mean that, we meant this, and fix it. And so they spend a lot of time fixing their own legislation because they're just forcing things down.
But you don't think there's any room, even with because of the supermajority of Republicans, for exceptions for women who truly need that access?
I think it makes it more difficult to stand up to
even have
the
that.
more extreme wing of the Republican Party. I do think that 70% of Oklahoma is in the middle.
Right.
It's middle 70%, but at the legislature, that 15% that's a little further right and gets a very loud voice because they're allowed to suspend the rules, and so they force that issue. behind the scenes quite a bit. But to your point, on abortion, outlawing abortion in Oklahoma doesn't make abortions not happen. What it does is make somebody who can't afford an abortion struggle to figure out how to make that happen. And these aren't teenagers. These aren't women who have not had kids, typically. And so when you look at these statistics, most of them are already mothers, and they're older. And they know the struggles of motherhood. And so in Oklahoma, without access to affordable child care, food security, and those things, they know that it's difficult to raise a kid in Oklahoma, and they're not going to bring another child into that. I'm a Catholic by faith, and I do believe from my faith that life begins at conception. That's my faith. I also believe in the First Amendment in America that says that you have the right to practice your religion, and not everybody's religion believes that life begins at conception. And so I have to respect that as an American, that if your religion doesn't believe that, that's okay. And I don't think, I think most importantly, it's not the government's role to get involved in these issues. This is between a woman and her medical provider. And so that's where I stand on those issues.
Okay. Yay. Does anyone else? I don't know what time it is on her phone.
I'll ask.
Good.
What would you do to help the education issue?
So education right now, I think the biggest need is teachers. And we've got teachers that are leaving the profession by the droves. So the first 5 years, I think it's 50 or 60% are gone in the first 5 years. And so figuring out how to retain a teacher that's there is a lot better than trying to find somebody to replace them. And so the way we do that, and a lot of the discussions I have on doors when I'm knocking doors, it starts with not demonizing our teachers. And I think these bills, like I mentioned at the beginning, when you have bills that want to fine teachers for having the wrong book, saying the wrong thing, all of these things, and then all of the regulations that get thrown down on you don't have time to teach, you've got to do all these other things.
And no money to
Yeah.
do the things that they tell you
Right.
you have to do.
Yeah, so there's a lot of unfunded mandates in education. We know that. But I think it starts with rebuilding that pipeline. And, I think some of the bills, again, Republican bill that came out that is going to give teachers in the first 5 years an extra $4,000 a year. That's a start. That's something. That may not end up being perfect, but I do applaud them for trying something because we have 4,000 emergency certified teachers this year. We know that number is going up next year. And that doesn't mean that that's a bad teacher in front of the class. What it means is they don't have classroom management experience, and that can be devastating for the kids that are in that class. So if somebody like me that has a master's degree, if I wanted to go teach, I could get emergency certified, probably do okay on the material, but how to manage that classroom is going to be a little different.
Yeah, especially if you have 30 kids.
Yes, and the larger the class size, the harder that is on an emergency certified teacher. And it also puts strain on the teachers that are around that class as well, because those teachers are having to pop in and check on what's going on in that room and help that teacher figure out how to manage that. Yeah. But we definitely need more money, helps. But really, going back to, it's been a long time, I think, in Oklahoma since we've been there, but teachers are public servants. And I think we need to raise them to the level that we do police officers and firefighters. And we need to have teachers up there with them when we think about how we view them and stop demonizing them for what certain members of the media portray them as teaching in the classroom.
I think that's an interesting correlation. Like, public servant, and even safety when you think about police and fire, because our teachers they pour so much into our children and give them the opportunity to succeed, maybe beyond whatever class they're teaching, but they provide a sense of safety, a sense of family, a sense of belonging, a sense of community right there in their classroom, in the school. So I really like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions? Anybody from the Zoom?
You got a well said from the Zoom, so I will.
Yeah.
That was so refreshing.
Yeah. And so I'll leave you with, I love the name of this group, +5, because that's what it takes to make a difference. The people in this room, we can't make a difference by ourselves. So that, when we get to October, we're in an election. If you're interested in a primary and you've got a candidate that you just have to have, you need to employ this strategy now and make sure to text at least 5 people on election day that you've got this candidate that they need to vote for. And that's so important to have that, to extend it beyond the room and have those conversations and make sure that people know that we've got good people on both sides of the aisle. There's a lot of really good Republican legislators up there that are wanting to do really good work, but they can't because they've got really bad legislators that are keeping them from doing that work on their own side.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
And then same as Jason, I've got envelopes too.
Yeah.
So
Recording
it takes money to make it work. And so what I tell people with these envelopes, I want everybody to take an envelope with them. So you can do one of 3 things with this envelope.
It's like I'm at church.
Yes.
One of 3.
Give me your
Yes.
10% time.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
There we go.
You can send me 10% of your
Yes.
send me 10% of your income.
No.
You can write me a check. I need money. It takes money to run these campaigns. If you can't do that, everybody knows somebody that lives in this district. This is one of the most prominent districts in the state. And everybody, if you look at this map, everybody knows at least one person. Write their name and send it to me in the envelope, and I'll get a hold of them.
Still feels like church. Bring a friend.
Yeah, bring a friend.
That's what +5 is all about.
Yes, and that's what +5 is all about. Write 5 names on there. And then the last thing, if you don't know anybody and you don't have any money, send me a well wish, something that'll help me as I go knock doors. Keep at it so we can make a change.
So Gina Nelson, who's running for superintendent, she says that teachers are saving and changing lives every single day. Pay professional educators a living wage and tone down the rhetoric. That's her take on it. So you had a lot of positive feedback. Humanize educators. She said that's important.
Moderators already.
All right.
So you have a lot of thank yous on here too.
Thank you.
Here, I'll shake your hand. Everybody leaves with an envelope.
You get envelope, you get envelope. I'll do the passing. I'll be the
Maybe I'll get there and see how many parties are
It still feels like
I'm definitely sitting in it.
Man, Yokio.
And they don't even knock doors with me for Greg. I
They had a
doors
little
for him.
protesting for people, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah, couldn't miss it. It's only down the street from me.
All right.
Are we pausing?